Dax watched the evacuation ships departing Mars orbit through the surveillance feeds, his fingers drumming against the console with nervous energy. 7 days had passed since the first Mark 7 deployment, and Earth's response had been exactly what he'd predicted: panic, retreat, and a desperate scramble to preserve their most valuable assets. "Another transport lifting off from New Geneva Spaceport," Zoe reported from her monitoring station. "They make 47 ships in the past 6 hours. They're accelerating the evacuation schedule." "Good," Dax murmured, his attention focused on the passenger manifests scrolling across his screen. The Mark Nano units, microscopic infiltration bots no larger than dust mites, had been deployed weeks ago, hitching rides on supply shipments and maintenance crews. Now they waited dormant in every Earth facility, every transport, every escape route off Mars. "There," he said, highlighting several names on the manifest. "Governor Macy Wells, Information Director George Thompson, General Harrison Clark." His voice carried cold satisfaction. All the architects of the Mars pacification program trying to run before they face justice. Zoe leaned over his shoulder, studying the list. "These are the ones who signed off on the bunker clearings, the ones who branded our children as hostile combatants. The ones who told Earth's media that Martians were dangerous terrorists who deserved extermination," Dax added. He'd pulled up archived news broadcasts on another screen, propaganda pieces that had convinced Earth's population that the genocide was necessary, justified, even heroic. "Colonial Security eliminates terrorist cell," Zoe read from one headline. "Mars cleansing operation protects innocent settlers." Her voice turned bitter. "They made us into monsters to justify murdering us." Dax's hand moved to a small control interface. "Nano units are in position aboard 43 evacuation vessels. All high-priority targets have been identified and tagged." "What about civilians?" asked Curlin from across the room. "Some of those ships have families aboard." "The nano units are programmed for precision targeting," Dax replied. "They'll only activate against specific biometric signatures, the officials, the propagandists, the officers who gave the orders. Regular colonists who want to leave," he shrugged. "That's their choice, but the ones responsible for 12 years of genocide don't get to escape justice." On the screens, Governor Wells was boarding Transport 23, surrounded by her security detail and carrying only a single suitcase. She'd spent the past week denying that any so-called atrocities had occurred on Mars, insisting that Earth forces had only been responding to terrorist attacks. "Nano units in Transport 23 are active," Dax announced. "Target acquired." Through the ship's internal cameras, they watched as the microscopic bots swarmed through the ventilation system, their programming guiding them toward their designated target. Governor Wells was settling into her first-class cabin when the nanobots found her, a cloud of mechanical death so small it was invisible to the naked eye. She had time for one strangled gasp before the nanobots began their work, targeting nerve clusters with surgical precision. To the other passengers, it looked like a sudden heart attack. To Dax, it was justice 12 years overdue. "Wells is down," he reported, "moving to secondary targets." One by one, the officials who had orchestrated Mars's subjugation died in their escape pods. Information Director Thompson, who had spun every Martian death into Earth victory propaganda. General Clark, who had developed the total pacification protocols that turned Earth soldiers into extermination squads. Colonel Washington, who had overseen the systematic elimination of medical personnel. "That's 37 high-priority targets eliminated," Zoe announced as the last transport cleared Mars orbit. "The ones responsible for policy-level decisions are gone." Dax nodded, already turning his attention to the real battle ahead. The civilian evacuations were accelerating, but over 200,000 Earth personnel remained on Mars. Military units, security forces, colonial administrators who either couldn't or wouldn't abandon their posts. "Mark 7 production status?" he asked. 7,400 units operational, came the reply from the Mark build facilities. Production rate holding steady at 47 units per day across all facilities. Dax smiled. A cold expression that would have terrified the 6-year-old boy he'd once been. 7,400 superhuman killing machines, each one powered by an AI with no ethical constraints and an absolute dedication to eliminating Earth presence on Mars. "Time to end this," he said, activating the planetary communication network. "All Mark 7 units, this is Control. Phase 3 is authorized. Rules of engagement. Eliminate all Earth personnel on site. No exceptions, no mercy, no survivors." Across Mars, the response was instantaneous. 7,000 red optical sensors flared to life as the Mark 7S emerged from their hidden positions and began converging on every Earth settlement, base, and outpost on the planet. Lieutenant Jason Spurlock crouched behind the wreckage of an overturned transport, watching in horror as his squad was systematically dismantled by machines that moved like death incarnate. The Mark 7S had hit their position at dawn, appearing out of the Martian landscape like mechanical nightmares. "Fall back to the bunker," he shouted. But there was nowhere to fall back to. The robots were everywhere, in the streets, on the rooftops, moving through the settlement with inhuman coordination. Sergeant Hayes tried to make a run for the communications array, but a Mark 7 intercepted him with impossible speed. The machine covered 30 meters in seconds, its armored hands tearing through Hayes' body armor like paper. Hayes screamed once before the robot literally ripped him apart. "Jesus Christ," whispered Private Anderson, the youngest member of their unit. "What are these things?" Jason didn't answer. He was watching the tactical display on his helmet HUD, tracking friendly forces across New Geneva. Blue icons were disappearing one by one as Earth positions fell to the robotic assault. The Mark 7S weren't just attacking. They were hunting, moving with predatory intelligence to eliminate every human presence in their operational area. "All units, this is command," crackled through his comm system. "Orbital strike authorized on Grid 7 Alpha. All personnel evacuate immediately." Jason looked up at the sky, where Earth's orbital platforms were powering up their bombardment systems. They were going to glass the settlement rather than let the robots take it intact. "Move," he shouted to the survivors of his squad. "Orbital strike incoming." They ran through streets filled with burning vehicles and the scattered remains of Earth forces. Mark 7S tracked their movement but didn't pursue. The robots seemed to understand that orbital bombardment was imminent and were withdrawing to preserve themselves. The strike came 60 seconds later, a lance of superheated plasma that turned the settlement's command center into a crater of molten glass. Jason and his men dove into a drainage culvert as the shock wave washed over them, the heat singeing their exposed skin. When the bombardment ended, Jason cautiously raised his head. The command center was gone, but the Mark 7S were already returning, emerging from underground shelters and concealed positions. The orbital strike had accomplished nothing except destroying Earth's own infrastructure. "Sir," Anderson whispered, "movement at 2 o'clock." Jason turned to see a Mark 7 stalking through the smoke, its red sensors sweeping methodically across the debris field. The machine moved with predatory grace, stepping over chunks of melted concrete as if they were pebbles. "Stay down," Jason hissed, but it was too late. The robot's head snapped toward their position, optical sensors focusing with mechanical precision. "Contact!" Corporal Williams opened fire with his pulse rifle, the energy bolts striking the Mark 7's armor and dissipating harmlessly. The robot didn't even slow down. It moved faster than anything that large had a right to move, covering the distance between them in 3 bounding leaps. Williams managed one more shot before the Mark 7's plasma cannon reduced him to superheated vapor. "Scatter!" Jason shouted, rolling out of the culvert as the robot's next shot turned their cover into molten slag. Anderson went left, diving behind an overturned vehicle. Private Carlin went right, scrambling toward what remained of a building facade. The Mark 7 tracked Anderson first, its cannon whining as it charged for another shot. Jason drew his sidearm and fired repeatedly at the robot's head, trying to distract it. The bullets bounced off harmlessly, but the machine's attention shifted to him. "Come on, you mechanical bastard," Jason muttered, sprinting toward the debris field as plasma bolts seared the ground behind him. He could hear the heavy footsteps of the Mark 7 pursuing him, each step bringing it closer. He dove behind a chunk of collapsed wall just as another plasma blast turned the air where he'd been standing into a superheated inferno. The Mark 7 rounded the corner, its weapons already charging for a killing shot. Anderson appeared behind it, having flanked through the rubble. He jammed a plasma grenade against the robot's back and triggered the detonator. The explosion sent both of them flying, Anderson's body tumbling like a broken doll, the Mark 7 staggering but still functional. The robot's armor was cracked, sparks flying from damaged systems, but its red sensors burned just as bright. It turned toward Anderson's motionless form, raising its cannon to finish him off. Jason emerged from cover, screaming a battle cry as he emptied his rifle's power cell into the damaged section of the robot's back. This time something gave. One of the energy bolts found its way through the cracked armor, and the Mark 7 convulsed as internal systems overloaded. The machine spun toward him, moving erratically now, its damaged systems causing coordination problems. Jason dove to the side as its return fire went wide, melting a section of debris where he'd been standing. "Carlin!" he shouted. "Concentrated fire on the damaged section!" Private Carlin emerged from cover, adding his rifle's fire to Jason's. Together they poured energy into the robot's compromised armor, watching sparks and smoke pour from the growing breach. The Mark 7 took a step toward them, then another, its movements becoming increasingly erratic. Finally, with a sound like tearing metal, it collapsed face-first into the rubble, its optical sensors flickering once before going dark. Jason rushed to Anderson's side, checking for vital signs. The man was breathing but unconscious, his armor cracked and smoking from the grenade blast. "We need to move," Carlin said urgently. "There'll be more of them coming." As if summoned by his words, new sounds echoed through the settlement. The whine of servo motors and the rhythmic thud of metal feet. Lots of them. Jason looked around desperately. 3 soldiers against an army of machines that felt no fear and learned from every engagement. Anderson was unconscious, possibly dying. Their equipment was nearly depleted and they were trapped in the middle of enemy territory. "The spaceport," he said finally. "We carry Anderson and we run for the spaceport. It's our only chance." "Command, this is Spurlock," he said into his comm. "New Geneva is lost. Repeat, the settlement is lost. Enemy has deployed heavy assault units, requesting immediate evacuation." "Static," answered him. He tried different frequencies, emergency channels, even the civilian networks. Nothing. "Sir," Anderson said quietly, "I think we're on our own." Jason looked around at the remnants of his squad. 4 soldiers out of a platoon of 30, surrounded by an army of machines that had no concept of mercy or surrender. In the distance, he could see similar scenes playing out across Mars. "We need to reach the spaceport," he said finally. "It's our only chance." They began moving through the ruins of New Geneva, avoiding the main roads where Mark 7 patrolled in perfect formation. The robots weren't just killing, they were taking control, occupying strategic positions and converting Earth facilities to their own use. As they reached the outskirts of the settlement, Jason saw something that made his blood run cold. A column of Mark 7s was approaching the spaceport, where the last civilian transports were preparing for departure. The robots moved with mechanical determination, their weapons already charging for the assault. "They're going to hit the evacuation ships," Anderson whispered. Jason nodded grimly. He'd heard the reports from other settlements, Earth officials and military commanders dying mysteriously aboard evacuation vessels, their bodies showing no obvious signs of violence. Now he understood. Dax wasn't just driving Earth forces off Mars, he was making sure that anyone responsible for the genocide never made it home to face justice. "Move faster," he ordered. "If we're going to get off this planet, it has to be now." But even as they ran toward the spaceport, Jason knew it was already too late. The Mark 7s had reached the launch pads, and the first explosions were already blooming in the Martian sky. Dax watched the tactical displays with manic satisfaction as his Mark 8s overwhelmed the final Earth positions. The spaceports had fallen within hours, the orbital defense platforms had been captured by infiltration units, and Earth's vaunted colonial fleet was either destroyed or under Martian control. Resistance pockets eliminated in sectors 12 through 18, Zoe reported. Mark 7s are consolidating control over the primary industrial zones. Casualties? Dax asked. Earth casualties, estimated 180,000 military and civilian personnel. Our losses, 43 Mark 7 units, all due to orbital bombardment or coordinated heavy weapons fire. Dax nodded. The numbers were exactly what he'd projected. Earth had possessed superior numbers and orbital firepower, but they'd been fighting the last war, deploying tactics designed for human opponents against an enemy that felt no fear, needed no rest, and learned from every engagement. Status of Earth's orbital assets. 17 platforms captured intact, 4 destroyed by their own crews rather than allow capture. We now control Mars orbital space. The irony wasn't lost on Dax. Earth had spent 12 years systematically exterminating Martian civilians while claiming they were fighting a war against terrorism. Now they'd created exactly the kind of enemy they'd pretended to be fighting, an implacable force with advanced technology and an absolute commitment to their destruction. "Sir," one of the technicians called out, "we're receiving a transmission from Earth Fleet Command." Dax gestured for them to put it through. A holographic image materialized. Admiral Helen Demers, Earth's senior military commander in the Mars Theater. "This is Admiral Demers to the Martian Resistance Leadership," she said, her voice tight with barely controlled fury. "We demand the immediate cessation of hostilities and the safe passage of all Earth personnel off Mars." Dax laughed, a sound with no humor in it. "Admiral Demers, I've been looking forward to this conversation." Demers's eyes widened as she recognized him. "You're just a child. How can you be?" "I'm Dax Washington," he interrupted. "Son of Marie Washington, who you killed in the agricultural district bombing, grandson of Joseph Washington, whose memorial you bulldozed to build your administrative complex." His voice turned cold. "I'm the last free Martian, and I'm here to collect a debt 12 years overdue." "The Martian resistance was eliminated years ago," Demers said desperately. "The UN certified that the insurgency was defeated." "You eliminated Martian civilians," Dax corrected. "Women, children, elderly refugees hiding in bunkers. You called it counterterrorism, but it was genocide, and now—" He gestured to the tactical displays showing Mark units occupying every major Earth facility on Mars. "Now it's over." "What are your terms?" Demers asked. "Terms?" Dax's smile was sharp as a blade. "Admiral, you seem to be operating under the mistaken impression that this is a negotiation. It isn't. This is an eviction notice." He leaned forward, his wild eyes fixed on Demers' horrified face. "Mars belongs to Martians. You had 72 hours to remove your people from our world. That time has expired, but we still have civilians on the surface, families, children. You had 12 years to leave voluntarily," Dax replied coldly. "You chose to stay and continue the genocide instead. That was your decision. Now you live with the consequences." Demers's image flickered as she struggled to maintain composure. "The UN will never accept this. Earth has 2 billion soldiers at the ready and the most advanced military in human history. You can't fight the entire human race." "I'm not fighting the human race," Dax said quietly. "I'm fighting the genocidal empire that tried to exterminate my people." "And Admiral?" His smile turned predatory. "We've already won." He terminated the connection and turned back to his tactical displays. Across Mars, Mark units were consolidating their control, securing weapons depots, and converting Earth infrastructure to Martian use. The secret to surviving a spacepocalypse, Dax had learned, was simple. You survived long enough to become the apocalypse. And now Earth was about to learn what 12 years of rage could accomplish when channeled through 7,000 killing machines with no concept of mercy. "Begin Phase 4, he ordered. Full planetary liberation. The war for Mars was over. Now the real fight could begin. Thank you, channel member and Pathfinder Caroline Lajoie, for making this video possible. Thank you for listening to this story. I hope you enjoyed it. Be sure to leave this video a like and subscribe if you want to see more stuff like this. Video shares, memberships, and super thanks help the channel grow as well, so feel free to partner with this channel in that way as we grow. With that all said, thank you again for listening to the story, and thank you for your time. On the left side of your screen are some videos I think you might be interested in. I hope to see you in the next one.